So The Portrait of Molly Dean is a book about a real event that you've turned into fiction, Catherine. I wonder, can you tell us what the challenges of taking that real event and making a fictionalised version of it?
Of course. Well, I came at the story, I wanted to be true to Molly Dean's story, so that was the crux of it for me, was to follow the facts as much as I could and keep the integrity of those facts. But I wanted to have a good story for the reader, and in a way I wanted to have a resolution for Molly too, because she didn't get a resolution for her own murder. So taking those facts and keeping the story going and not going off in the directions that I sometimes would have liked to have taken it, because you could see I could throw in extra clues, or I could throw in an extra suspect who looked really, really good, but I wanted to keep Molly's cast of characters fairly integral to how they were in Melbourne in 1930 and follow that story in that way.
And you've come up with a solution and come up with a person responsible and a character you've invented. Is that based on anybody in particular, or is it just somebody you've dreamt up?
It's essentially somebody I've dreamt up, but I think somebody I've dreamt up because of the way other people looked at Molly Dean's case. So there was a lot of ideas about there being a conspiracy theory because she was connected to Melbourne movers and shakers, I guess you would say, of the day. And so when the case disappeared, when no one was convicted of the murder and everything just went away, it would have been very easy to say, someone behind here was pulling strings and putting pressure on the police to not look too hard at certain things. So the character was in a way suggested to me by the circumstances, again, surrounding her death and the silence following her death.
This was your very first attempt at crime fiction, or fiction at all.
Yeah.
As a person who was a vet, who has 3 degrees in art and art history, who's worked in publishing and in gemstones, how do you get to be a writer?
Well, that's really difficult. I guess the first thing I ever wrote would be, the first thing that ever was sort of published and got acclaim, shall we say, was on the dietary management of gastrointestinal disease in small animals. So it's a really big leap to then go to fiction like this. But I guess for me, because I was coming at it from that true story too, and because I had in my mind Molly Dean and wanting to restore her to the public eye. So that was what I really came at. So it was her story first, and then everything else followed on from there.
You're part of the Sisters in Crime group.
Yes.
How helpful were they for you as a starting up author?
I think they were amazing. I think first of all, knowing that they were there, that there was this group of women who were encouraging and supportive, and then the various events that they run, there's always things that you can go to, in the evening to hear other writers talking about the process, talking about their research and their work. Every now and then they run She Killed Her, which is sort of a writers' conference, a writers and readers' conference. And I think just that support, and there's a connection to the International Sisters in Crime as well. So knowing that even just knowing that there are other women out there who are doing that sort of work and writing is just great encouragement. But then having them there when you've published and having, I guess, almost a little cheer squad to push you on the way and sort of shove you out into the world a bit more is just been amazing.
So my understanding, the original Sisters in Crime was a group in California.
That's right.
Was set up. Melbourne, I think, was the second group to set up. Are there other groups around the world, do you know?
I think there are. I believe there's a UK group now. I'm not sure about Canada. I think they're sort of affiliated with the US group, but yeah.
Interesting. And it's interesting to me because, in my view, many of the best crime writers are in fact women. It's been true through the so-called golden age in the 30s and 40s. True today. What do you think about that, and why perhaps are women so good at writing crime?
Well, there's certainly a lot of good men who write crime too. I think, I have to say, in a way, perhaps it's the female perspective in society. So there's sort of, and this is a topic for an entire panel discussion that could go on for ages, but I think first of all you have the idea that women are much more likely to be victims. And if you're a woman, there's pretty much always going to be a man who's stronger than you. If someone's going to attack you, they're going to be bigger and stronger. And if you talk to a lot of women, particularly younger women, they'll have a strategy. If they go out in the evening, they'll be thinking, I'm not going to leave my drink alone, I'm going to have my keys in my hand when I walk to the car, I'm going to have someone with me, I'm not going to walk past a van on the street. So women, even if they're not writers, are already thinking about, I could be the victim of crime. So they're thinking about how they can avoid crime and perhaps how they can get themselves out of a situation if they get into it when they're going to be probably the weaker person in any sort of altercation that happens. So they've already got this sort of baseline of thinking about crime and thinking about sneaky ways to get out of things. And then you've got the other side of it, which is that often women can kind of sneak under the radar too. People underestimate what women can do. So, for example, you have the Oversteegen sisters in Germany in World War II, the two resistance fighters, Freddie and Truss. And these girls were doing drive-by shootings from the back of a push bike because no one suspects a 14-year-old girl with their hair in pigtails to have a gun concealed in her lap and be sniping at Nazi soldiers as they ride on by. So there's sort of two aspects to being female that you can sort of look at there, just as a baseline to what might give you an insight into sort of, I guess, criminal minds from the victim's perspective, and being that under the radar, sneaky way of, I can do this and no one will notice because no one will suspect that it's me.
Katherine, as you know, there have been some horrendous attacks on women, and particularly women walking home by themselves late at night in Melbourne in recent times. Eurydice Dixon, Jill Marr come to mind immediately. Molly Dean is also attacked in her true story, not coming off the tram, but actually because she missed the tram and she walks home late at night by herself, is attacked and murdered. Did you feel any discomfort with writing a fiction based on that when such horrible real events also happened recently here?
I think at the time, as I said, I was upset that Molly's story had been forgotten, and I think that for me that was the key thing, was to bring her back to the public eye, because I think it's the victims that we need to remember, not the perpetrators of these crimes. So in bringing her story back in that way, yes, it's horrifying that there are still echoes of that today, that women still aren't safe, that with all the technology and CCTV, and Molly was only 200 metres from home, you should be able to walk home safely at night. But it was really more about highlighting that story and not letting her be forgotten. And certainly, as I said, I was very conscious of remaining true to her story and not turning her into a character in her own narrative. I wanted her to be the subject of the story and not the object, not a girl gets murdered and kind of story. I wanted it to be about Molly.
In writing the book, you're writing about events that occurred in 1930, and then you're having a modern day narrative running alongside by your investigator, Alex Clayton, who is trying to investigate that former event. But you didn't set the modern day in the modern day, you sent it back about 20 years. I wonder why you chose to do that.
Two reasons. One of them was so that I could potentially still have people who were alive in Molly's time still existing in the more recent narrative. But also I didn't want to make it too easy for Alex. I didn't want her to have mobile phones. I didn't want her to have masses of internet access available to her. It takes a little bit of the shine out of crime if you can just sit down and go to Google and look up basically everything you need to know. So that was two really driving reasons for having it a little bit in the past.
And Alex is assisted by her friend John, the painting restorer, in this book. You've now released your second novel, which also has Alex and John working together in an art-relating mystery. Are we going to see more of Alex and John into the future, do you think?
I think we are. I hadn't anticipated that when it was about Molly's story. Alex came after Molly. But then when I'd finished writing Molly's story, I found that I had this protagonist in my head, and she seems to sort of sit there and I'll be researching a painting or an artist, and suddenly she'll be like, did I ever tell you about the time when I had that painting and this happened? No, you didn't, but please let me get my laptop. Tell me all about it. So I have this character, and I think, let's face it, there's a lot of grubby little corners in the art world where, things get stolen or forged, or, there's a lot of things for Alex to do, I think.
And both of your books, The Portrait of Molly Dean and Painting in the Shadows, are set in Melbourne. Do you think Alex and John can continue to operate just in Melbourne, or are they going to have to spread their wings a little bit?
Well, I think they're probably going to head out into regional Victoria fairly soon. There's some stuff going on in Tasmania that I think they probably have to have a look at. But Alex has her dog as well, Hogarth, who's an Irish wolfhound, and I think Hogarth has become a much more integral part of the team than I had envisaged. So Hogarth has to somehow be factored in. So I don't know if we'll be popping him on the boat to Tasmania anytime soon.